Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear viewers, welcome to another episode, first part of the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path. In this part, I'd like to focus on a little more of my own role in computing in Saudi Arabia, and bearing in mind the fact that one of the reasons for going to Saudi Arabia was that it was a developing country and I wanted to contribute, and in particular it was a Muslim developing country and I wanted to contribute to the Muslims. Okay, so one of the Saudi National Computing Conferences, we used to split into parts and there were discussions, and in one discussion I suggested that the computing science departments and their faculty could assist in consulting on government contracts. The reason for this was that they would bring in consultants from abroad to do the consulting. There was never one consultant right through from specification to implementation and then post-audit. There was never one consultant for that. It was always a different consultant for a different part of the project. And with this, of course, things didn't always work out. And they had a ready excuse that the previous consultant was wrong or whatever, okay? And it was always on a cost-plus basis, the contracts to start with, which meant that they overrun and they were quite expensive. So what I suggested was, if the computing science departments provided faculty members from the universities to do this consulting, then not only would the universities benefit, the faculty would benefit, the students would benefit, and there would be a transfer of technology towards the kingdom because of getting involved at this level of consulting and then implementing what was being proposed in the projects. And that was actually put forward by someone who was working as an expatriate in the Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency, and the way it was phrased was the government contracts should have consultants from a particular university, which was not what I said. I said universities, okay, but this guy proposed university, and of course the other universities weren't happy about that. I'm not surprised. I wouldn't have been happy about that either. But anyway, alhamdulillah, what happened out of it was that they did get consultants from the computing science departments, and these people were involved in this type of project management, if you like, or consulting. And in particular, the University of Petroleum and Minerals was playing an active part. At that time, we were probably more advanced in computing than the other universities. And what this meant was that we had an external affairs department, and we did in fact consult to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their project when they were building their new premises, to the Saudi Railroad, and also to Rabita al-Islami, for instance. And I'm not going to go through these in detail, but just to give an example, a friend of mine who was with Rabita, he said, Daud, he said, they want something on computers. Can you do it for them? I said, well, it depends what they want, but I can look at it. Well, they wanted some specifications, so I gave them a specification. They were happy with that. Then they came back and said, now we've got the hardware, now we need the software to go with it. Can you do that? And I said, no, I can't do that. So they came to the university and they actually got the project. Now they developed the software that they wanted, which was micrographics, basically. But at the same time, they took us to the printing press that they had, and this was a very small one in those days. I'm going back to about 1980, 1981, something like that. And then they said that they wanted to print all these books that now the King Fahd press prints, okay, and different copies of the Quran in different languages, etc., etc. Could we do it? And I said, no, we can't. And I'm not even sure that it's a computer that should be used for this, because I would have thought something like monotype was a much better form of of using the fonts and getting the right typefaces, and that could be done a lot more easily than with computers. I know you use computers in it, but the technique is different. And I happen to have a sister who worked for Monotype, so when I was back in the UK, I went along and talked to them to get more of an understanding of what was involved. And then I went back to the university, and then I told them about it, and I told Rabita about it. And out of that, eventually, came the King Fahd printing press. So you can see we didn't consult, because we weren't equipped to do that type of consulting. But out of it, they got what they wanted, and the printing press now, I think, is a fantastic setup in Medina, and alhamdulillah. So the sort of things that you do and what you want to say, you don't know what they will come to. You just think it's the right direction. If you're not sure, you can do istikhara, of course, and then you can actually get committed to what you're doing and what you believe in. But the whole idea, as I said, is trying to contribute to the development of the kingdom. And one way to do this was to actually get the Saudis involved in consulting. How else would they get involved? You know, and this actually became a big thing later on. And many faculty members were consulting on many different projects, and this was good for the country. And if they fed it back into their students, some of the projects as masters or even undergraduate projects, it would actually get the students developing as well. So, you know, it was all plus in that sense. In the case of the Saudi Railroad, they had one line between Riyadh and Dammam, which we'll say was of the order of 400 kilometres, okay, 250 miles. They had one train going backwards and forwards. It would go one way in the morning and back in the afternoon. They actually doubled that at one time. And they had something like 5 depots where they were doing spares or stores. What were the consultants talking about? A huge database system for Canadian Pacific or Indian Railroad. Compare those railroads with this 400 kilometers in Saudi Arabia. And to put that database on a computer required an enormous computer. And I said, this is not what's required. Well, unfortunately, the American was on the cost plus, and of course the value of the contract meant that he would get a higher percentage. So he wanted the bigger equipment, which is understandable from his point of view, but it wasn't necessary, and the Saudis couldn't sustain it. They didn't have the techniques or the technology or even the trained people, and they'd have to pay an awful lot of money to set up such a centre, to run such a computer. And this I pointed out to them, but what the Saudis said to me was, Daud, don't worry about it, we'll put it in the Arabic version of the contract. So actually the whole thing was done, and a smaller version of that particular database was written specially for a small computer, and this is what the Saudis ended up with. So, you know, they got what they wanted, but not at the price that they would have to have paid for it if they'd gone through the normal consulting channels. So this is the sort of role that we were playing, not bringing down the prices, but trying to make sure that the Saudis got what they wanted. And this was the role that I hoped that the university faculty members would play, making sure that the government contracts were what was required, and that it worked according to the requirements of the Saudis. Because the university has a reputation to maintain, and if the faculty members aren't maintaining it, then there's going to be another problem, you see. So in that sense, it's self-regulating. So this was the whole purpose of trying to get this point of view across to people, and it actually worked. Now, around about 1980, the president of our university at King Fahd University of Petroleum Minerals was going around various departments talking to people and having like a working lunch with them in that department. And when he came to the computer centre, I asked him in public, does he think it's time for the universities to have their own computing network? And it was interesting what he said. He said, Daud, it's not so long ago when we were tribes of Bedouin raiding one another. Do you think we're ready to talk to one another by computer? But to his credit, what came out of it was project was given to the computing science department, and they actually wrote a proposal for a computing network, academic computing network for Saudi Arabia and actually the Gulf, okay? And then the person who was assigned to actually implement that used to contact me and say, Daud, what do I do? How do I do this? How do I do that? And I would tell him, and then he'd go to the manufacturers and get the whole thing done. And in fact, that was up and running quite quickly. I think by 1982, we did in fact have what was called GulfNet, which was an academic computing network, and it went through Bahrain and somewhere else, I forget where now. But that was a step forward, perhaps. And I'll come to that, to the next development of that in the next part, inshallah. So let me end this part here with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and hope to see you back in a short time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to the next part of this episode of Sirat al-Mustaqim, and I'm talking about networks. Basically, I've just mentioned GulfNet, which was an academic network set up for the universities in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And after that, there was a requirement to connect to internet. At this time it was bitnet, which was store and forward, which meant that it wasn't actually interactive. You couldn't send messages real time and get the answers back. You used to send something, and after a while it would come back when someone responded to it. So that was store and forward. Then we were getting towards interactive use, and the real requirement was for images to be sent from hospitals to America, for instance, for evaluation, diagnosis, and possible remedial action or even surgery. And so this was a real-time requirement, but there are other requirements as well. But there were a lot of issues involved, and I was the consultant to KAXT, which was King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, and this was where the country node would come in, and from there it would be distributed throughout the kingdom. So at that time I was actually involved in specifying what was needed, the speed, the line speed, and the equipment, and who the vendors would be, and so on and so forth. And we did in fact set up a link between Saudi Arabia and Washington University in the States, because there was a spare, it was a transponder is what they would call it, but bandwidth on a satellite link already to America. So we utilised that, alhamdulillah. And in fact that was up and running, but initially there were a few problems with it, but once those were resolved it was fine. And these, like China is finding, were security problems, okay? And I'm not going to get into it any more than that, but they weren't trivial. They had to be resolved, okay? And I remember once that someone in the States, on one of the discussions, said, I have visions of Daud going around the students and forcing them to use the computer just to get access on it. And I wrote back and said, it's not quite like that. I said, I am responsible for security on the system and what the students can do, but it's not quite what you suggest. For instance, we had an exam mode in one of the universities for using the computers, and they could take exams on it. And the idea was that they couldn't interact with anyone else on the network. So there were the lines drawn, if you like. But unfortunately, one clever guy was in another room, and he logged on with one of the identifiers that one of the students had in this secure area and did the work, and then logged off. And then the guy in the classroom taking the exam logged on with the same identifier, and there was the work already done by him. But of course we could track that, because we could find where the address of the device that he logged on to and where the other guy logged on to with the same address. So we could actually track that and actually prove it. But yes, we did have security issues. And yes, I was concerned with security issues, because the whole idea was to make it fail safe and to protect the registrar as well as the faculty members, and also stop the students from doing the wrong things. But yes, there were security issues, but they were resolved, alhamdulillah, and the internet did come to Saudi Arabia, and people were fairly happy with it, as far as I know. wasn't always as fast as you might expect in the kingdom because of the loading techniques and so on and so forth, but at least people could access it. And we did in fact have a dial-in facility quite early on in King Fahd University where I worked, so people on campus could actually dial the facilities on campus and actually access from their homes the internet. And that was, well, not the internet, BitNet at that time. And that was quite good, and that only developed and became more sophisticated with time. And then of course it developed more with the internet and everyone had access from home. But in order to get there, we were consulting to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I was in New York for a progress meeting, if you like, and IBM had announced the computer, the personal computer, about 6 months earlier. This was, I think, 1982. And I actually bought a PC there at that time in the States before it was announced outside of America. And I paid something like $5,000 for a 64K PC with what was called a baby blue bundle, which was another 64K and a communications port. Okay, so that was the size of the computer in those days, and the hard disk was not very big. I forget how much it was now, but it wasn't very big at all. And I paid $5,000 for that in those days. So you can see the cost of personal computing today is much, much less, and there's much more power in these devices. But the reason I bought the PC was because I looked on that as an intelligent terminal for mainframe devices, and I thought that they would communicate with the mainframes. I thought they would be used from home, and so we would have this usage, and they would replace what we called dumb terminals in that day, although they weren't quite dumb. And I brought one back to Saudi, and in fact I used it from my office. I was lucky enough I could have a 00 telephone number because of external contacts that I had. And in one time we installed a new computer, and there were problems with it, and the engineer had to upgrade it on site, and he used the personal computer through the telephone to actually download all the stuff that he wanted to be able to upgrade it. So, you know, alhamdulillah, these things sort of worked out. But now, of course, I was an instant expert on PC because I was the only guy with one in UPM. And so people used to buttonhole me and ask me for specifications, and then when they bought them they used to tell me their problems and can I help them with them and so on and so forth. And so even when I used to go to the mosque I would get 3 or 4 requests about the personal computers and that, coupled with my own working life, meant that there was almost no time for myself. And it came to a head one day when one of the friends said to me, Daud, he said, I want you to specify a computer for me. I said, okay, what do you want? He said, I want a PC which would do architecture, and I want a scanner, and I want a digitizer, and so on and so forth. I said to him, well, you have to give me a couple of days to look that up, and I'll work it out for you. He said, no, he said, I want it today. I said, I can't do it in half a day. It's impossible. Oh. He thought I could just bring these things out of my head and just put it all together. And then I realized what I was getting into. You know, I was doing all these things like this and working almost a 10-hour day rather than an 8-hour day or whatever. And in some cases it was a 12-hour day because we were doing a big project. And so in the end I got to the stage where I was so far into work that I felt that life had to be something more than just work. My wife would say to me, let's go shopping or let's go and visit someone. And I would say, I'm too tired. And I would just sleep in front of the TV. So I said, there has to be more to work than this, and more to life than just work. So let me get out from under, because I don't want to drop the service levels. I don't want to try to catch up what other people who are leaving behind. And I was trying to pick up as much as I could, but I couldn't take everything. And in the end I came to the conclusion that I was too deep into what I was doing, and the only solution was to leave. So I actually tendered my resignation. They didn't want to accept it, to be honest. And in fact, the vice president, when I was called to his office, he said, Daud, write your own contract. And I said, it's not a question of that. I said, it's a question that I'm so deep in what I'm doing, the only way out is to actually leave and get out from under. I said, I don't want the service levels to drop. I've done the best I can. Other people will have to take it on now. And so I actually went from King Fahd University to King Saud University, okay? And that was an interesting situation because the Vice President said to me, "Have you got another job?" I said, "No." He said, "So why are you leaving?" I said, "Well, I told you I can't continue like this, the pressure is too great." So he said, "Are you in contact with anyone?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Who?" I said, "Well, the President wants me to go to Mecca, to Al Qura University, but they're not doing anything." I said, "In King Saud University, the the acting director is coming to my office fairly regularly and telling me his problems, and I'm telling him the solutions, and he's going back again and coming back with the next problem." I said, "So I don't know if this means that they'll offer me a job or not, but at least they're in contact." He said, and then he said, "Do you trust them?" I said, "No question of trusting them." I said, "I trust Allah." So that's basically where it left. And then I did get an offer from King Saud University, and I did go to King Saud University. But I mean, it was sad in a way because I had a good relationship in KFUPM, and it was an excellent group of people to work with. And we achieved quite a lot. It was a small technical university. When I went there were about 3,000 students. When I left there were about 5,000 students. So it was really a technical university, and it was a pleasure to work with them, you know. And it was so small that you got to know practically all the students. And I used to pray in the student mosque and in the student, well, not the student nines now, we had our own mosque now. But alhamdulillah, it was good. A real good time there, and I was pleased I went. So let me stop here in this episode, and inshallah we'll meet again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.